Good morning and good evening. Thank you for joining us at this morning's North Korea Economic Forum annual conference. My name is Celeste Arrington. I'm the director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIX, and I'm also a professor of political science and international affairs at George Washington University. Thank you for joining us today. Amid all of the changing global order and the realignments between North Korea and Russia, today's annual conference, which also goes on tomorrow, is particularly important as we explore how North Korea's economic policies and international relations intersect. We have a great lineup of excellent speakers today and tomorrow. And to get us started this morning, I'd like congratulatory remarks from some important people who have supported us over the years. Before I introduce our congratulatory remarks offerers, let me first thank the GWIX staff, Ravina Ugale and Takara Askew, for organizing this morning's conference, and most importantly, the brains behind this conference, my associate director, Kim Yono, who will be moderating tomorrow's conference. Please join me in welcoming first Associate Dean for Research Initiatives and Director of the Institute for International Science and Technology Policy at the Elliott School, Dean Nick Van Ortas. He has been quite supportive of GWIX activities over the years, and so it's my pleasure to welcome him to offer the first congratulatory remarks.
Good morning. Thank you, Celeste. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are around the world. I'm Nick Van Ortas, a colleague of Celeste, and indeed a big friend of Korea. I think Korea was one of the first few countries that I visited right after joining GW in the 1990s. I go back a long way. And since then, I visited the country tens of times, and I have very, very, very close friends all over the place, universities, governments, and so forth. So I love the Korean Peninsula, but I must admit, I know not very much about North Korea. I know quite a bit about South Korea. So I want to welcome you all to this conference. This is the North Korea conference the North Korea Economic Forum conference. Is the 6th annual conference of this type. As Celeste said, the intersection of economics and international affairs is critical for everybody, and of course is critical for North Korea. Now, interestingly enough, although I am an economist and I am doing international affairs, North Korea is one of those few countries that escape at least my radar screen. So while I read the newspapers and I know the general things, I do not really know much about the economic setup of that country. And I hope today's conference will really shed some light on this. Let me close by thanking very much the sponsor of this event, which is the KDI School of Policy and Management. They have been extremely supportive of our Institute of Korean Studies, and I want to really thank them for their presence and their collaboration with GW. Without further ado, Celeste, thank you.
Thank you very much. You just stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to, in particular, thank the KDI School for Public Policy and Management for its longtime support of GWIX, and most particularly the North Korea Economic Forum, which, as Nick just said, is a rather unusually focused look at the intersection of economic policy and international affairs. I'd like to introduce now, we're going to have a video recording of remarks from Dean Yoo Jong-il of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, who is himself an economist. as well. He has taught in the UK, in the United States, in Japan, and also in Korea. And you can see his bio in the program for the conference. But I believe we're going to start his remarks now. And again, many thanks for their long-standing support of our policy-focused programs at GWIX.
Dr. Nicholas Bonotas, Associate Dean of the Elliott School. Ms. Rachel Lee, Chair of the North Korea Economic Forum. Dr. Celeste Arrington, Director of the Institute for Korea Studies. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my great honor to co-host this year's North Korea Economic Forum. On behalf of KDI School of Public Policy and Management, I extend a warm welcome and my deepest gratitude to all the speakers and participants. We at KDI School are delighted to continue our collaboration with the George Washington Institute for Korea Studies, bringing together an outstanding group of experts who share a profound interest in North Korea. I would also like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to GWIX for organizing this conference and for being an excellent partner over the years, including hosting the conference and cultural events during Korea Week a month ago. North Korea Economic Forum is the flagship program of our cooperative project with the GWIX. Over the years, this annual conference has examined a wide range of issues concerning North Korea, including the intricate relationship between its economic and foreign policy. The forum continues to explore the roles of institutions, markets, and external actors in shaping North Korea's internal affairs and international interactions. The theme of this year's conference, the North Korean economy in a changing global order, is right on the mark. As we witness significant shifts in economic policymaking around the world, North Korea has adopted new strategies that present both substantial challenges and opportunities. Initiatives like the 20 by 10 policy aimed at regional development underscores strategic pivot towards enhancing the material conditions within the country, reflecting a nuanced approach to self-reliance and economic management amid prolonged sanctions. Furthermore, the recent strategic treaty between North Korea and Russia amid the evolving geopolitical landscape introduces new dynamics into the regional security architecture. This treaty, emphasizing mutual defense and broad cooperation, signals a significant shift in North Korea's external relations, potentially altering trade patterns and strategic calculations across East Asia. Our discussion over the next 2 days will provide crucial insights into these developments. We aim to better understand the shifts within North Korea's economy, consider its future trajectory, and evaluate the implications for regional and global stability. Once again, I warmly welcome all the speakers and participants. I look forward to the presentations and discussions that will take place over the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean Yu, for your remarks and continuing support of GWIX and in particular the North Korea Economic Forum. And last but certainly not least, it's my great pleasure to introduce Rachel Min-young Lee, who is the chair of the North Korea Economic Forum and has also been a longtime partner of GWIX. She is a senior fellow for Stimson Center Korea program in 38 North, and many of you may be very familiar with her analysis. She's going to offer some congratulatory remarks, and then tomorrow will also help introduce the keynote speaker tomorrow. So Rachel, you can take it away.
Thank you for the for your warm introduction, Celeste. I would like to start by extending my sincere gratitude to Yonho, Ravina, and Takara at GWIX for organizing this conference. I would also like to thank the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, the co-host of this conference, and an unwavering supporter of the North Korea Economic Forum. And last but not least, I would like to give a big shout out to Mr. Bill Brown, who spearheaded the North Korea Economic Forum for the past 3 years with so much passion and dedication. I have attended the North Korea Economic Forum conference since 2021, and what I appreciate about this event is that it is not limited to just hard numbers and statistics, but it brings out the full range of issues associated with the North Korean economy, such as internal political dynamics, social and cultural issues, and even foreign policy. As is the case with every country, North Korea's economy and economic policies do not exist in a vacuum. They are part of broader domestic and external trends and developments. And in fact, in the past at least 3 years, there was a strong correlation in the, excuse me. And in fact, in the past, at least there was a strong correlation between North Korean economic policy, intentions, and its behavior toward the United States and the West. So in that vein, I'm excited and proud to present this year's theme, the North Korean economy in a changing global order. Over the next 2 days, we will attempt to better understand the nexus between North Korea's economic and foreign policy in a fast evolving global security environment. Today, we will start off with 2 presentations that will lend us better insight into North Korea's economic trends and priorities. So Dr. Hojye Kang of the Free University of Berlin will give us his take on the 20x10 policy for regional development, which has been Kim's signature economic policy since the beginning of this year. Then Dr. Song Lim of the Bank of Korea will share his findings on the state of the North Korean economy by tracking inflation trends since the pandemic. Tomorrow, we will zoom out and view North Korea's economic policy choices in light of how the country has responded to the breakdown of the Hanoi summit in early 2019 and subsequently great power competition. Ambassador Kent Harstedt, the Swedish government's former special envoy to the Korean Peninsula, will set the stage by sharing his views of the connection between the North Korean economy and the country's foreign policy and prospects for North Korea's re-engagement with the West. Dr. Nam Hoon Cho of the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses will discuss the implications of North Korea's deepening ties with Russia for the North Korean munitions industry. And then Dr. Chu Ping Hu of Malaysia's East Asian and International Relations Caucus will give us a readout of North Korea-Russia relations and their potential impact on North Korea-China economic relations. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And Celeste, back to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And also to Nick and Dean Yu for your congratulatory remarks. Let's shift gears now into the first session. As Rachel mentioned, we're going to drill down into some of the regional development policies of the DPRK, as well as inflation trends since the pandemic with our 2 expert speakers today. Before I introduce our speakers, let me just remind you of a few logistics. We have a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen into which you can type questions, and I will be taking them towards the end of our hour and 15 minutes together. In addition, we have simultaneous translation this morning. Likewise, at the bottom of the screen, you can find an interpretation button and select the language that you prefer. All right, so let me first introduce Dr. Kang Hojye, who is senior lecturer at the Institute of Korean Studies at the Freie Universität of Berlin. He comes from a background of physics and history and takes a look at some of the scientific and technological innovations, as well as economic policies of the DPRK. And today his talk is titled North Korea's Domestic Economic Development and the 20x10 Policy. After Dr. Kang's presentation, we're going to turn to Dr. Im Song, who is Associate Research Fellow at the Economic Research Institute of the Bank of Korea. And as Rachel already mentioned, he will be focusing on analyzing inflation trends in North Korea since the pandemic. He has been interested in North Korea's fiscal and monetary system over the years and has authored a number of reports about the North Korean Central Bank, for example, as well as North Korea's economic policy more broadly. And it's my great pleasure to welcome them both here. I will introduce our two discussants afterwards, after their two presentations, and they can then offer some remarks about each presentation. Okay, so first let me turn it over to Dr. Kang.
네, 반갑습니다. 방금 소개받은 강호재입니다. 지금 이제 시간이 얼마 없으니까 바로 시작하겠습니다. 예, 잘 보이시죠? 오늘 저는 북한의 경제 발전 전략 중에 지방 발전 전략에 대한 얘기를 하려고 합니다. 올해 들어와서 북한이 2010 policy, 지방 발전을 위한 2010 policy를 추진했는데 이게 어떤 배경에서 나왔는지, 그리고 이 정책의 특징이 무엇인지를 역사적 관점에서 설명하려고 합니다. 그래서 큰 그림은 북한이 15년 전부터 지방 발전을 위해서 준비를 해왔고, 그것이 2021년부터 명확하게 공개되었고, 그 결과 올해 들어와서 구체적인 건설 계획, 지방 경제 건설 계획이 2020 정책이 시작되었다라고 얘기하고 싶습니다. 그리고 그 핵심의 북한의 자립경제 전략이 무엇인지, 지금까지 북한이 자립경제 전략을 내세우고 있다라는 얘기는 많이 나왔지만 그 구체적인 내용이 무엇인지 국가 단위와 지역 단위로 나누어서 설명하려고 합니다. 자, 오늘 컨텐츠는 이렇습니다. 우선 두 가지에 대한 좀 큰 이론적인 배경 혹은 제가 설명하기 위한 틀을 얘기하려고 합니다. 첫 번째는 자립경제가 어떤 구성 요소로 되어 있는지를 얘기할 거고요. 이거는 제가 연구한 결과에 바탕합니다. 두 번째는 일반적으로 혁신체제라고 하는 것이 어떤 구조인지 간단하게 설명하겠습니다. 국가 레벨과 지역 레벨에서 공용으로 쓰고 있는 시스템, 혁신 시스템을 설명합니다. 그리고 지금 추진하고 있는 2010 정책의 파일럿이었던 김화군 사례를 정리하려고 합니다. 마지막으로 북한이 15년 전부터 준비해왔던 지역 발전 체제의 구성 요소인 리서치와 에듀케이션 파트에서 어떤 기관들이 만들어졌는지 설명하고, 이게 정책적 동향으로 신문에 나오는 기사 수의 변화를 가지고 보여드리려고 합니다. 기본적으로 북한의 자립경제라는 말은 많이 소개되었지만 그게 어떤 요소들로 구성되었는지는 잘 소개되지 않았습니다. 연구도 많이 안 되었고요. 제가 박사과정에 20년 전에 박사과정을 논문을 준비하면서 살펴봤을 때 4가지 구성 요소가 있습니다. 에너지를 공급하는 연료와, 그리고 물건을 만드는 원료, raw material, 그리고 사람, 마지막 과학기술이죠. 기술적 지원. 이 4가지의 자립을 만들어내는 것이 북한이 추구하는 자립경제 모델입니다. 여기에 최고 지도자의 가이던스, 영도나 지도가 있으면, 결합이 되면 이 전체를 북한에서는 주체과학이라고 부릅니다. 이 형태는 1960년대 후반에 만들어졌습니다. 이노베이션 시스템에서는 기본 요소를 3가지 정도로 봅니다. 생산을 하는 프로덕션, 그리고 노동자들을 교육하는 에듀케이션, 그리고 새로운 기술을 개발하는 리서치, 3가지가 기본인데, 요즘은 리소스가 워낙 많이 필요하고 소모를 줄이기 위한 합리적인 선택을 중요시하기 때문에 정책도 또 하나의 요소로 쓰기도 합니다. 여기에 법, 인프라 같은 것들이 들어가긴 하지만 액트로서는 이 3가지 플러스 1가지가 기본입니다. 북한에서는 리서치, 새로운 기술을 개발해내는 파트를 과학원에서 담당합니다. 그리고 리서치를 중요시하게 하느냐, 프로덕션을 중요시하느냐는 나라마다 시대마다 다르지만 북한은 프로덕션을 중요시합니다. 현장에서 모든 것을 다 결합을 하고 심지어 최고 지도자까지도 현장에 가는 걸 요구합니다. 그 둘 사이에 연결하는 것이 그 유명한 북한의 천리마 운동 혹은 천리마 자급방 운동이었습니다. 그래서 저는 이것을 북한식 기술혁신 운동이었다라고 해석을 했습니다. 이거는 제가 연구한 결과에 있습니다. 그리고 지금 90년대 경제가 무너진 다음 2000년대 들어와서 21세기 들어와서 북한에서는 국가 시스템, 혁신 시스템을 다시 건설하면서 새세기 산업혁명 혹은 새세기 교육혁명을 시작했습니다. 그리고 이 근저에는 국방력을 완성하고 거기서 획득한 기술 그리고 자원 등을 민수로 전환하겠다는 프로젝트가 있었는데 이 변환이 자리 잡고 있습니다. 오늘 얘기하려고는 지역혁신체제, 지역 발전을 위한 정책은 조금 다른 형태로 구성되어 있습니다. 요소는 똑같지만 공개가 된 것은 21년 8차 당대회였고요. 거기에 핵심은 시티와 카운티, 시, 군 중심이다라는 거였죠. 그럼 이런 변화를 이끌어내기 위해서 준비했던 제도가 전자업무연구소, IT 기술을, 인포메이션 테크놀로지를 활용하는 걸 위해서 만든 전자업무연구소가 있고 전통적으로 과학기술을 통한 경제발전을 연결해주는 강화하기 위해서 만든 과학기술위원회가 있습니다. 교육 쪽에서는 고등학교 레벨인데 거기에 직업 교육을 좀 더 강화시킨 기술 고급 중학교가 만들어졌고요. 또 하나 중앙과 지방의 격차를 줄이기 위해서 원격 교육 체계를 만들었던 거죠. 그래서 2022년에는 이런 포스터도 나왔습니다. 저는 처음 봤는데 컨스트럭션 플랜을 만들었는데 리 단위였다는 거죠. 북한의 행정체계는 제일 위에 도, 프로방스가 있고요. 그 다음에 200개 정도의 시군이 그 안에 최소 구조입니다. 리는 그 속에 20개 정도씩 있는 작은 마을 단위인 거죠. 그래서 아주 작은 마을 단위에서도 전망 계획이 만들어졌다라는 의미죠. 그래서 올해 나왔던 지방발전 2010 정책은 1월 16일 날 김정은이 직접 연설하면서 처음 공개가 됩니다. 갑자기 시작되었던 거죠. 그 결과는 갑자기 시작되었지만 급격한 추진 속도를 내서 1월 24일 날 그 구체적인 내용들이 마련되고 결정서가 채택이 됩니다. 잘 보시면 1월 24일이라는 숫자가 보이죠. 이 숫자를 딴 이름의 특별 연대가 만들어져서 각 지방에 파견되어서 지방 경제 발전 전략을 수행합니다. 제가 정리한 것은 4가지가 있습니다. 지방 경제 발전 전략 중에 올해 추진한 2010 정책은 첫 번째, 김정은이 직접 모든 것을 담당하겠다고 선언합니다. 제 기억으로는 처음입니다. 또 하나, 모든 자원, 섹터들을 동원합니다. 당연히 내각, 경제를 담당하는 내각은 너무나 당연하고요. 그리고 당도 여기에 결합되는데 심지어 군대가 처음부터 공식적으로 동원됩니다. 동원된다는 건 자금, 그리고 인력, 그리고 각종 자원들을 다 동원한다는 거죠. 그래서 조금 전에 얘기한 대로 1, 2, 4 연대를 새로 꾸려서 각 지방에 파견합니다. 여기까지는 형태, 조직상의 문제고 내용상의 문제로는 마지막이 아주 주목할 만합니다. 하나하나의 개별 공장들을 건설하는 걸 포기합니다. 작년까지는 거기에 또 정책이 포함되어 있었는데 올해부터는 개별 공장을 건설하고 복구하는 것은 포기하고 전체 인더스트리얼 컴플렉스를 만드는 것이 집중됩니다. 그래서 시, 군 단위, 시티, 카운티 전체를 인더스트리얼 컴플렉스를 만들어서 경제 구조를 새롭게 짜겠다라는 게 특징입니다. 올해 추진하는 이 정책의 파일럿 버전이 김화군에서 실행이 되었습니다. 2020년부터 실행이 됐는데 이 김화군이 선택된 것은 가장 안 좋은 조건에서 정책을 실험해 보겠다는 의지였습니다. 인더스트리 인프라스트럭처가 거의 없었고요. 아주 극심한 수해, 홍수 피해를 입었고요. 그래서 그걸 극복하기 위해서 우선 집을 새로 짓는데 군이 동원되었고 굉장한 속도로 1000세대 이상 집들이 완전히 새롭게 지어졌던 상황이었습니다. 그때 2020년 10월 1일 날 김정은이 처음으로 이곳을 방문하고 지방, 특히 시군 중심의 지방 발전 전략을 어떻게 해야 되는가를 결심하고 추진했다라는 게 북한의 설명입니다. 여기에서 보면 인더스트리얼 컴플렉스에 무엇이 들어가 있느냐가 특징인데 집과 음식 그리고 옷이 기본적인 일상생활을 위한 3대 요소라면 그것이 다 들어갔죠. 집은 지었고 음식 공장 그리고 옷 공장 그리고 일상생활에 쓰는 일용품 공장 daily necessary 그리고 마지막 특이하게도 종이 공장이 포함됩니다. 이 네 개의 공장으로 구성되는 인더스트리얼 컴플렉스를 새로 만드는 것. 그것이 김하군에서 시험한 것이고 지금도 이 정책이 실행되고 있습니다. 예, 그리고 그럼 김하군에서 나왔던 정책들을 자세히 보면 자립경제 노선의 특징이 지방 레벨로 가면 어떻게 달라지는지를 볼 수 있습니다. 국가는 친구도 다른 지원해줄 단위도 없기 때문에 모든 것을 스스로 합니다. 하지만 지방 단위로 내려가면 국가의 지원이 있기 때문에 모든 것을 스스로 할 필요는 없습니다. 그래서 중앙으로부터 연료와 기술을 지원을 받고 지방에서는 원료, 로 머티리얼과 인력 공급만 담당합니다. 그래서 연료, 원료, 인력까지는 항상 똑같지만 어드밴스 테크놀로지가 국가 레벨에서 지원 가능하느냐 아니냐가 지방 발전 전략의 차별화를 가져올 거라고 봅니다. 그래서 지방은 로 머티리얼을 만들어내는 팜랜드를 잘 만들고 키우는 것 그리고 워커들을 노동자들을 교육시키는 것이 핵심 역할이 됩니다. 나머지는 국가 단위에서 진행한다는 거죠. 예, 약간 그림을 보여드리겠습니다. 2020년 8월에 비가 많이 왔고 연간 강수량의 90%가 한 달, 8월 초에 다 집중해서 내립니다. 그래서 모든 것이 없어져서 집을 새로 짓고 이렇게 이 강 옆에 있는 부지 산업단지 인더스트리얼 컴플렉스를 만들기 위해서 산을 폭파시킬 정도까지 합니다. 시간이 다 들어가네요. 예, 이런 공장들이 만들어졌고요. 종이 공장도 있고요. 그러면 여기에서 어떤 것들을 주민들한테 공급하는지를 보면 지방 원료들을 가지고 만든 상품들을 이렇게 공급하고 있고요. 먹거리, 음식들이고요. 그리고 이 기계들을 보면 전부 다 중앙에서 공급됩니다. 김일성 종합대학, 그리고 과학원, 그리고 평양에 있는 인쇄공장, 인쇄대학 뭐 이런 데서 가고요. 교육은 중앙에 있는 한덕수 평양 경공업대학에서 본격 교육으로 직원 교육을 합니다. 예, 그리고 각종 부자재들은 과학기술위원회에서 맡아서 진행하고 있다라는 게 뉴스에서 나왔습니다. 여기서 지방의 핵심 리서치를 통해서 프로덕션을 도와주고 있는 그 조직으로 과학기술위원회가 있는데요. 이거는 60년대에 만들어졌습니다. 근데 90년대 경제가 어려울 때는 과학원과 통합하면서 사라졌고요. 그게 다시 2009년에 다시 시작합니다. 그래서 이 조직은 지방의 조직도 있지만 국가 단위도 있고요. 완전히 새롭게 만들어지는 것은 Electric Business Research Institute라고 하는 곳인데 지방에만 조직이 있습니다. 2008년에 처음 만들어졌고요. 기본 임무는 인포메이션 테크놀로지를 지방에 적응하는 업무를 담당합니다. 그래서 이렇게 익스피디션에 참가하고 자기들의 역사를 설명을 합니다. 각종 프로덕션도 나왔고요. 2022년에 새로운 전자무연구소가 만들어졌다는 뉴스가 또 나옵니다. 김정은의 역사 중에서 수행하던 사람들의 수기를 모아서 낸 첫 번째 책이 2012년에 나옵니다. 막 최고 지도자로 되고 자기의 시대가 열린 첫 해에 나왔는데 여기에 그 이전 공개되지 않았던 2008년 기사가 나옵니다. 2008년 기사에는 전자무연구소에 김정일과 함께 간 김정은의 행적이 소개됩니다. 거기에서 프로그램을 어떻게 만드느냐를 질문했다라는 얘기죠. 그리고 뉴스를 그래서 찾아보니까 2010년에도 이미 김정은이 후계자라고 내정된 다음이라 공개가 됩니다만 뒤에 나오는 명태를 보면 김정은이 2008년 12월 20일 날 전자업무연구소에 갔던 그날 여기에 왔다 갔다라고 기록이 나옵니다. 김정은의 공개된 가장 오래된 역사가 전자업무연구소와 함께 기록되었다는 거죠. 그만큼 중요하게 취급했다라고 볼 수 있습니다. 이거는 좀 오늘 시간이 없으니까는 스킵을 할 텐데 이런 IT를 활용한 경제발전 전략은 역사가 꽤 오래됩니다. 2016년, 2009년 올라가면 2060년대까지 올라갑니다. 김정일에 의해서 주도가 된 게 굉장히 많은데 과학기술을 통한 경제발전 전략은 김일성의 오래된 꿈이기도 합니다. 예. 이제 지방 발전을 위한 교육 쪽을 보면 시간이 혹시 많이 되면 좀 사인을 좀 해주시면 제가 하겠습니다. 지방 발전을 위한 교육 조직이 만들어진 것 핵심은 기술공업중학교입니다. 하이스쿨 레벨이긴 하지만 보케이션, 직업 교육을 위한 특별 조직입니다. 학교죠. 2012년에 시작이 되었고요. 북한의 전체 교육 시스템을 바꿀 때 결정은 됐지만 시작은 2016년에 아이디어가 그리고 첫 번째 학교는 17년에 만들어집니다. 왜 17년이 중요하냐면 20년에 첫 졸업생이 나옵니다. 그리고 첫 번째가 아닌 IT 영역에 또 한 번 더 첫 번째 학교들이 생기는데 2018년이죠. 그러면 2021년에 모든 영역에 처음 설립한 모든 영역의 졸업생들이 2021년에 나옵니다. 그리고 22년까지 넘어가면 다른 단위에서도 직업 교육을 겸하는 집중하는 학교들이 생겼습니다. 그리고 원격 교육, 중앙에서 뛰어난 교육 시스템과 역량을 가진 사람들이 지방에 교육을 해주는 그 시스템이 우리는 e-learning이라고 할 수 있는 그건데 북에서는 원격 교육 체계라고 부르지만 이게 2010년부터 대학 레벨에서 형태를 갖춥니다. 그리고 조금 전에 지방공업 정책에서 나왔던 한덕수 평양경공업대학이 2015년에 원격 학부를 만듭니다. 이 시스템들이 지방에서 기술자들을 혹은 노동자들을 교육하는데 활용되었던 거죠. 자, 마지막입니다. 이렇게 해서 북한이 지방 발전을 위해서 오랫동안 조직적으로 준비했다는 게 보이는데 실제 어떤지 북한에서 공개하는 데일리 뉴스페이퍼, 노동신문과 민주조선에서 지방공업과 지방경제가 포함되어 있는 기사들의 숫자를 체크해봤습니다. 그러면 아주 재밌는 게 나오는데 2021년에 당연히 피크가 될 거라고 예상했지만 2011년에도 또 한 번의 피크가 있다는 거죠. 그 당시에도 북한은 지방 발전을 위해서 집중하려고 했던 겁니다. 근데 갑자기 환경이 바뀌면서 그 정책은 좀 우선순위가 밀렸습니다. 무슨 일이 있었는지 잘 보세요. 2009년에 군수, 국방력을 갖추는 것보다 갖춘 그 역량을 가지고 민수, 시빌리언 라이프를 발전시키는 전략이 채택되었고요. 그리고 지방공업 혁명이라는 말이 2010년에 처음으로 언급이 됩니다. 그럼 여기에서 왜 갑자기 2012년부터 지방공업에 대한 언급이 줄었는지를 보면 군수 쪽입니다. 군수공업과 국방공업, 심지어는 국방과학술과 관련된 언급이 상대적으로 높아집니다. 서로 역상관관계를 맺습니다. 즉, 국방력에 집중하면서 지방 발전을 위한 관심이나 우선순위가 줄었던 거죠. 그래서 여기서 갑자기 지방공업에 대한 관심이 늘어나는 시점은 2017년입니다. 2017년 11월 29일 날 화성 15형이 시험 발사되었고 성공으로 판명이 되었죠. 이건 멀티 워헤드를 장착한 ICBM으로 명명되었습니다. 자, 결론입니다. 지금 하고 있는 2024년에 추진된 2010 지방발전 정책은 길게는 2008년부터 준비되었습니다. 혁신체제가 국가 레벨에서 지역 레벨로 옮겨가기 시작했고요. 거기에는 리서치 파트에서는 과학기술위원회 그리고 전자업무연구소, 교육 파트에서는 기술공업중학교 그리고 원격 교육 체계가 있었던 겁니다. 이 기관들이 갖춰지고 형태를 잡고 드디어 효과를 발휘할 때쯤에서 지방발전 전략이 공개되고 본격화되었던 거죠. 그래서 2024년의 정책은 최소한은 김화군 사례를 분석한 다음에 평가를 해야 됩니다. 그리고 이 정책의 아주 중요한 특징은 모든 자원들, 특히 군에 있는 것들도 민으로 본격적으로 쓰기 시작했다라는 거고요. 그리고 개별 공장이 아니라 산업단지, 인더스트리얼 컴플렉스를 만들고 시군 단위, 아주 작은 마을인 리간이 시군 단위로 독립 자립경제체제를 만드는 게 목표라는 거죠. 그럼 뭐가 자립이냐? 국가는 모든 것을 자립해야 되지만 지방은 연료와 기술은 국가에서 공급을 받으니 로 머티리얼과 휴먼 리소스를 자립한다가 기본 개념이었습니다. 네, 이상입니다.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kang. It was a fascinating look at the regional innovations that are happening policy-wise in North Korea. Our first discussant today is Dr. Im Chul, who is Associate Professor and Director of the North Korean Research Center at the Institute for Far East Studies at Kyungnam University in South Korea. He has spent more than 3 decades working on North Korean political economy topics, external relations, and unification issues, and he has advised a number of South Korean governments about the inter-Korean summits. So it's my great pleasure to welcome him as our first discussant for Dr. Kang's presentation today. Before he gets started, let me just remind everyone that you can put your questions into the Q&A box. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I am Professor Chul Lim, who will be the discussant for the Professor Hojye Kang. So first of all, I would like to mention that that was a really interesting presentation. So I was given 10 minutes. Let me give about 3 to 4 questions. And then I'll add my contents of the North Korean regional development policy. So first of all, Dr. Kang, as he was mentioning about the conclusion, he said that this regional development policy was first prepared 15 years ago and said that it was officially launched in this year, 2024. So I think this was his main idea throughout his presentation. So on what occasion made the North Korean regime to start this regional development policy 15 years ago? Can you explain more about the background of this policy? I think that would be really helpful for the participants of this seminar. Just to give my quick comments, there are various issues faced by the North Korean regime, and that would be, one of them would be the gap between the haves and have-nots. After the 1990s economic crisis, North Korean economy has been facing recession. And with the advent of markets within North Korean economy, depending on how much the North Korean regime utilizes the North Korean market system, there has been a great gap between the economy within the regime. And there has also been a gap between the city and the rural regions. So I think that's why North Korean region came up with this regional development policy. So I think for the Kim Jong-il and the Kim Jong-un, they actually didn't have much time to actually address the gap between the urban and rural areas. So in that sense, I think there should be a balanced development between city and rural regions. There has been a widening gap between the city and rural regions. And I think if North Korean regime overlooks such gap, that would go against the basic principle of communist belief. So in that sense, I think we should understand that policy in that regard. I think explaining about this regional development policy centering around technology or science would be a partial explanation about the 2010 policy. That's my comment on your presentation. So I would like to hear your opinions on that. And my second is that recently, this year's January, Chairman Kim Jong-un announced this 2010 regional development policy and is now currently constructing light industry factories in 20 cities and counties. So I think it's too early to actually analyze the outcomes of these movements, but I would like to ask this question to Professor Kang. As North Korean regime is carrying out this regional development policy, what will be the biggest obstacle for the regime? What are your ideas on that? Now, my third question is, the Electric Research Institute, the Commission of Science and Technology, you mentioned all about these institutions. And actually, Professor Kang is one of the renowned experts in Korea when it comes to North Korean science and technology. So from the perspective of science and technology, I think he's trying to analyze the North Korean situation here. But when it comes to Electronic Research Institute and Commission of Science and Technology, do you think these institutions will play a crucial role here for the regional development? In which areas or sectors would these institutions play a crucial role? So that was the three questions that I would like to ask to Professor Kang. And actually, the regional development, the 2010 policy proposed by Kim Jong-un is something that we have to take note of when it comes to the changes of North Korea. I think the policy priority for the Kim Jong-un would be, on my idea, I think there are two. That is nuclear development and rural regional development. So I think these two factors are the two biggest priorities for Kim Jong-un. And I think regional development has become a core agenda by Kim Jong-un and the regime. So I think Professor Kang has explained this about clearly, but right now it is clear that Kim Jong-un will take in charge of all this regional development policy, and all the supreme leaders, all the important personnel of the Congress are now participating in this regional development. So also the most advanced military manpower are being dispatched for this regional development. All the talented scientists and engineers are being harnessed to contribute to this regional development, as well as construction of factories. As a result, the resources, the fuels of North Korea are all being mobilized and being flowed into the rural regions. So I think this is to raise the income level of the residents in rural regions. And I think this would address the house issues, the necessity issues in rural regions. I think that's the key goal of North Korea, to complete this policy within next 10 years. In that sense, this Regional Development 2010 policy is actually focusing on the sustainability of North Korean regime. I think this will become an important determinant on how we analyze this regime's success or failure. And lastly, I think one of the things that we all need to take a look into is that currently Kim Jong-un is especially focused on light industry factory. In other words, the regime is trying to address the labor issue of the rural region residents. So by constructing the factories, the rural region residents could solve their house and necessity issues. So to address this, I think that's why the light industry factories are being built in rural regions. In other words, these are not highly advanced factories. So the light industry itself is for the clothing necessities for the residents of the rural regions. So I think this is something that we need to take into account. And also, Kim Jong-un has also tried to expand, moving beyond light industry. That is building hospitals and also building hubs for engineering technology, and also building facilities for grain management. So in some light industry, hospitals, science and technology facilities, grain management facilities, by establishing these facilities, I think that's the core priority of the regional development policy, to enhance the level of rural regions. Now, as for the hub of science and technology, it's not only sharing the information of science and technology, but so that residents in the rural regions could also watch movies and also enjoy cultural activities, and so that they can also enjoy various convenience facilities such as stores. So in other words, I think this is constructing multi-purpose complexes in rural regions. So I think we can all agree that North Korea is facing difficult economy. But so far, North Korea has maintained its status as a nuclear armed state. But on top of that, it is now trying to gain positive public sentiments from the rural region. And I think the regime is being aware of the public sentiments. So in order to receive positive public sentiments, that would be to establish factories and creating jobs, but at the same time also providing convenience facilities and cultural facilities and hospitals. And by comprehensively building such facilities within 10 years, I think North Korea is trying to raise positive public sentiments. And I think this is the task that has not been addressed long time ago, starting from Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, all the way to Kim Jong-un. So Regional Development 2010 policy is something that we can actually diagnose the North Korean situation, and also something that we can prospect the future of North Korea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Im, for your remarks. I think you gave us a good sense of some of the political incentives that the regime has for pursuing these regional development programs. Dr. Kang, before you address Dr. Im's remarks, I think I'd like to turn it to our presentation from Dr. Im Sung first. And then if you could address Dr. Im's comments in the Q&A. I think that would work best. So as I mentioned, our next presenter this morning is Dr. Im Song, who is Associate Research Fellow at the Economic Research Institute of the Bank of Korea. He will be presenting in particular about inflation trends in North Korea since the pandemic. So without further ado, let me turn it over to you, Dr. Im.
Good to see you all. I'm Im Song from Bank of Korea. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to you all for inviting me to such a precious opportunity. Thank you for George Washington Korea Studies Institute. So today's my presentation topic is inflation trends in North Korea since the corona pandemic. First of all, I would like to introduce you the Korea's price index in North Korea. So this shows the rice price trend. And the reason why I'm sharing this is that when studying North Korea's economy and the trend itself, North Korean prices is represented by rice prices. So there are two main reasons. In the North Korean market, rice is the most representative goods, and North Korea is very exclusive. So besides rice, it is really difficult to purchase something besides rice. So most of the studies researching prices in North Korea was mainly focused on rice. But there is a question that is it the only way and is it appropriate to analyze like that, but not necessarily. Because rice itself is, of course, the most representative one, but it is just one of the so many goods in North Korea, and other goods also get affected from other factors. So it does not completely reflect North Korean prices 100%. So that is why here I invented this price index. So I would like to introduce this. And I have been conducting study from 2006 to 2023 for 17 years. So it's a compilation of North Korean prices. And there were 5 cities, including Pyongyang City, and the research was conducted quarterly. So I collected data at the end of each quarter, and food and housing, clothing, fuel, and coals, among other items. So more than 100 items were collected. And then there were 71 main items that were frequently used by North Korean citizens. And the formula was I used the Las Paris formula. So that was the brief introduction. And then based on the study, I took a look at the prices here, and there are 2 different graphs. One is the trend of inflation in North Korea, and the right one is the growth rate of inflation rate in North Korea. So from 2006 to 2023 shows the trend, and it can be categorized into 4. From 2006 to 2009, it was the jumping stage. It showed a 45.3% annual growth, and the second phase is from 2010 to 2012, and there was this high inflation. And there was this short hyperinflation period in this second phase, and then phase 3, stabilizing stage between 2013 to 2019, which showed 5.8% annual growth. So compared to the past, which showed 526.7% in phase 2, it is very stabilizing. So in the fourth phase, 2020 to 2022, is the re-increasing phase. Because of the COVID pandemic, it showed 11.5% annual growth. And then last year, 2023, because of the reopening effect, North Korea opened its border, the inflation rate dropped. And it kept decreasing at the level of near 2020. So this long-term trend is showing, and this graph is showing how much the factors contributed to each changes in this graph. From 2014 to 2023, I would like to briefly introduce the representative factors. Is that one is grain prices, colored in orange. From 2014 to 2019, it was on a downward trend. So the grain prices was on a downward trend and stabilized, and then it began increasing. And in 2020 and 2021, it increased, and in 2023, it decreased again. And second is colored in gray foodstuffs, except for grains. So grains are mainly produced in North Korea, but other goods are imported from China, among other countries. And this index until 2019 was stabilizing, but after the COVID pandemic from 2020 to 2022, it contributed the most to the inflation. And in 2023, it decreased again. The third, colored in dark blue, is the sundries category. Imported goods, medical goods, sanitization goods, among others, are included in this blue, which are mostly imported. If you take a look at the prices in 2017 and 2018, it increased significantly. And the reason behind it is that the North Korean sanction was strengthened. And from North Korea's perspective, because of the sanction, the price is going to increase. Because of that projection, the sundries prices rose. And in 2019, it decreased again. And since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, the sundries prices also rose. And in 2023, it decreased again. So if you take a look at the trend from 2013 to 2019, almost all the indices were stabilizing, but afterwards it jumped a lot in 2023, and you can see that it decreased again. So that was the main trend. So during the COVID period, North Korea's prices rose a lot. And what is the reason behind it? Basically, if you take a look at the factors of inflation, there are aggregate demand and supply factors. Aggregate demand includes trade volume, exchange rate fluctuation, among others. So these contribute to aggregate demand. And in terms of supply factors, there are money supply, income, and projected inflation, among others. During the COVID pandemic, North Korea's inflation factors were mainly divided into these two. And there are two for aggregate demand, a trade volume, and second is the weather factors contributed to agricultural changes. So if you take a look at the aggregate demand supply factors, North Korean citizens' income decreased. North Korean government went into a tightening monetary policy. So in terms of demand, it was suppressing the inflation factors. So the aggregate demand contributed to inflation, and supply factors suppressed inflation factors. So that was the briefing. And the first factor is the trade volume, I just said. So if you take a look at the left graph from 2006 to 2023, it shows exports and imports of North Korea. And in 2016, North Korea where there was a sanction because of development. And between 2017 and 2018, export decreased, for example, coal and minerals. So export and minerals decreased about 90% between the 2 years. And the blue graph is export. So export decreased first. And then when sanction was strengthened, import was keep stabilizing, but because of the COVID outbreak, even import decreased. So import decreased by 80%. So during the COVID pandemic, import and export showed almost 0%. And the right graph shows import from China and categorized into different stages: raw materials, immediate goods, capital goods, among others. And during the COVID pandemic, the most decreased one is intermediate goods. And second is consumer goods, colored in orange. So intermediate goods and necessity goods were decreased, and North Korea was hit very hard. So necessities, how it influenced North Korea. The graph below are the goods imported from China: soybean oil and seasoning and sugar. These three are shown here. From 2020 to 2021, imports significantly decreased, and because of it. And if you take a look at the upper table, the inflation rate is really high. Soybean oil, seasoning, and sugar prices skyrocketed. And in 2022, the COVID was eased, and the trade volume slightly increased. Then if you take a look at the upper table, in 2022, the inflation rate, of course, the prices itself increased. However, compared to the past, the increased rate was easing. And the last column, 2023, again, the border reopened because the COVID restrictions eased, so the trade volume increased. So the prices began decreasing. So the prices increase in North Korea is highly dependent on trade volume. And next slide shows the trade volume and inflation rate. If it shows correlations between income of North Korean citizens, or CLMV, standing for Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam. These four nation citizens average, if you compare it to North Korean citizens' income, during the COVID pandemic, CLMV's average showed 3.6% increase. However, North Korea showed 11.5% increase. And if you take a look at the right, shows imports. During the COVID, North Korea's increase rate was nosedived to almost 0%. However, CLMV showed increase or just a moderate decrease. So if you take a look, you can see that the COVID lockdown in North Korea was a very huge factor to North Korea's inflation. And next is North Korea's grain production. The decrease in grain production, how it changed the prices in North Korea. So how the market price is decided in North Korea is that compared to last year and compare it to this year, and depending on how much they produced, they decide the import prices. So if the price decreased compared to last year, if North Korea imports a lot of grains, then it does not affect the prices that much. So the first row here, shows the domestic production in North Korea. The second row shows imports from overseas. The third shows the grain prices index. And in the bracket shows the change rate. So in 2017 and 2018, 2 years in a row, the rate decreased. And in the middle, the next year, in 2018 and 2019, the imports increased. And in 2018 and 2019, the grain prices decreased, which means if the previous prices decrease, but if the government imports more, then the prices still decrease. And in 2022, well, it decreased in 2020, and afterwards, the COVID lockdown made almost zero import from overseas. And as a result, in 2022, the grain prices showed 12.4%. So 2020 and 2022, the grain production decreased, but eventually, because of the market reopening in 2023, the grain prices decreased by 12.3% YOY. So I explained the egg rate supply, and then I'll move on to the egg rate demand. First is the decrease in income. North Korean citizens' income decreased. The reason is just like I explained, North Korean prices are decided by imported goods, but the intermediate goods and necessities decreased in imports, which means the factory are not run fully. So, which means the cutbacks in incomes of North Korean laborers. And necessities import decreasing means the necessities supplied to the North Korean market decreases, which means North Korean people cannot sell much. And because of the COVID restrictions, the trade gets controlled. And on top of that, the market operating hours also shortened. So those market participants, those merchants, their income decreased. So laborers' income decreased and merchants' income decreased, which means as a whole in North Korea, the supply and demand also both decrease. So which acts as a suppression vector of the prices in North Korea. So did the real income in North Korea decrease? If that's a question, then we cannot actually see because North Korea does not release such data. But if you take a look at the graphs here, it shows the relative corn to rice prices. So why I'm showing this is that if you take a look, corn is relatively cheaper than rice. So if North Korean citizens have less income, then of course they'll buy corns instead of rice. So corn's demand increased, which increased corn's prices. So from 2013 to 2019, the index was 0.36. However, during the COVID, it increased to 0.45, which means corn's relative price increased, which means North Korean citizens' income decreased. And this shows the last factor, which shows the tight monetary policy. So North Korea suppressed the money circulation in the country. So it decreased the demand and supply. So the left graph is North Korea's growth rate from 2010 to 2012. It showed over 500% of growth rate, just like I mentioned in my previous slides. So this explains most of the factors, but the first is there was a monetary innovation in 2019. However, it failed and the monetary value decreased. And the second is that if you take a look at the right graph. It shows the growth rate of fiscal expenditure of North Korea. From 2010 to 2012, colored in red, which shows from 7 to 10.1%. In 2012, it was the 100th anniversary of Kim Il-sung's birthday. So because of that, North Korea announced that they are going to build a strong and prosperous nation. So they invested a huge amount of budget. So they printed out astronomous amount of money. So because of that, there was huge inflation. So North Korea learned a lesson from it. They shouldn't print out crazy amount of money. So they learned a lesson from there. And after 2013, Kim Jong-un, supreme leader, ordered that they will begin a tightening monetary policy. So the budgetary expenditures growth rate is keep decreasing compared to the past. And during the COVID pandemic, the overall policy did not change that much, but because they had struggling from importing, but if just printing out a lot of money to solve that problem just ends up just stagflation, which means just prices go up, but the problem does not get solved. So that is why North Korea is not keep printing out money. So this shows the indices, and then compare it to the past and compare it to the past and present. So during the COVID-19 period, the biggest factor was the import changes and North Korea's inner production of grains, and then aggregate demand. North Korean income decreased, and North Korean government began monetary tightening policy. So these are the factors. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Im, for your presentation. Since we are running short on time now, I want to turn it over to discussant comments from Bill Brown, who, as Rachel mentioned, is the prior chair of the North Korea Economic Forum. He also did some important stuff in government, including as economist and East Asia specialist for the federal governments in the intelligence community, as well as elsewhere. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Bill Brown. And since we have 8 questions, Bill, if you don't mind keeping your discussant remarks short, we're going to end in 15 minutes. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for having me here. And, I always start off a talk on North Korea by saying being an economist on North Korea is so easy because nobody knows anything about it. You can say whatever you want. Now, this work by Dr. Lim and a lot of others at Bank of Korea and KDI are making me worried that I can't say that anymore. They do a lot of work and they're putting together some really great stuff. This is a great paper, it really is. I've got a whole bunch of questions I'll just list. We don't have time to go through them, but I really want to commend the paper. I really like the way he sort of looks at the pressures for inflation in the economy, and then deflation. And now I'm thinking we're looking forward inflation all over again, but that's sort of looking for the future. Maybe I'd like to add, I have about 6 questions, so let me just list them out. And I don't expect you to try to answer them. But they're sort of, think of them as questions for the future, for future research. I think one larger comment I have on the paper, though, is that he doesn't really address the issue of dollarization. He mentions it a little bit. But, in North Korea today, they use, it's a very unusual economy where they use won mostly, but they also use US dollars for larger purchases. And they use Chinese yuan for imported products. So it's this mixture of three different currencies, even within somebody's wallet, that makes it incredibly interesting monetary topic. It's almost like they have to try to keep the exchange rate stable. And Rachel Lee produced or translated a paper quite some time ago, 2015, I think, a letter from Kim Jong-un to his central bank people, telling them in so many words, let's keep the yuan stable against the dollar. And they did that quite well, 8,000 yuan for quite some time. I just remarked last week it's 16,000. It's doubled in just the last few weeks. That is, the dollar has doubled, the yuan has fallen in half. So something huge is going on right now as we speak. The questions I have, first is on the data itself. Someone like me, I no longer have access to classified information. Not that it was ever very good, tell you the truth. And when they got it, they didn't use it. It was sort of pathetic. But he's using a lot of data here that I don't have access to. I think the Bank of Korea has done this for a long time. They used to publish it, but now I can't find where they publish it. So it's very hard. I use just, the few items that are in the North Korea Daily and Asia Press, but it's not near enough to produce a price index. The second question or issue, I think, is wages. Don't really look at wages, or sort of people look at income like in the markets, kind of where you work, produce something and you get some money from it. But even in North Korea, wages are a huge part of the economy. They're way low. They've been way too low, state set wages for their own employees and for state enterprises. Pitiful wages. It's mostly still, or until very recently, it's all maybe changing very radically. Until recently, it's been all ration economy, where you're paid stuff and not money. Fortunately, they're moving toward money, but I've been arguing for years, not fast enough. But now this may be happening faster. Third question is over the central bank itself, the Chosun Bank. As I mentioned, that letter to them, I think they look to me like very conservative bankers, more conservative than ours, certainly, and that they've, as Dr. Lim pointed out, they've had a very, very tight monetary policy. That sounds good. It cuts inflation. It solved the inflation problem, but it created, I think, a huge investment problem, so that they haven't been investing. It's like a very tight, very high interest rates. They don't really use interest rates, but it's the same phenomenon. Fourthly, it's a question: has the stability in yuan in the last few years and the use of dollars, has that really raised North Korean private savings? Again, this would be a very good thing for people in North Korea to have their own savings they can draw on. But for monetary policy, it's a little bit of a danger if people start suddenly selling, if they start abandoning the yuan and start spending it, you'll see a huge jump in inflation. And so they have to tangle with that. With dollars, they don't have to worry so much because they presumably can't produce dollars. So dollars is much more protective saving device for them. In his data, he only uses yuan. It'd be interesting to see if you could do it, what prices in dollars. For example, houses, residents, big items. One thing to remember is yuan, the biggest bill is 5,000 yuan, which is present rate about 35 cents, right? So now they're using more and more electronic money, which sort of solves that problem to a degree. But I'm wondering what's happening to dollar prices or RMB prices. And then lastly is maybe a question for Dr. Lim, do you have a thought on why what's happening right now? It's unfair because this is not your paper, but if you have a thought on why, I think about 2 months ago, the yuan went from 9,000 yuan per dollar after a decade of stability, basically, to 16,000. and now it's stopped. It's hung in there at 16,000. There was a very interesting item just yesterday in Daily NK that suggests the regime has set the official exchange rate at 8,900 won, which would be really an interesting phenomenon. And I'm writing a little paper on that now. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on it. But thanks a lot. A great paper and well worth everybody looking at it.
Thank you very much, Bill, for your comments. I just want to flag a couple of questions that we have received from the audience before I turn it back to Dr. Kang and Dr. Lim for final responses to our discussants as well as these questions. And if I can beg your indulgence, I propose that we go about 10 minutes past until 10:40 a.m. East Coast time. Does that work? All right. So in the questions, we've received about a dozen questions, but many of them wanted to know, for example, about where does the budget come from for these regional development projects, and does North Korea have the internet communication technology infrastructure to be able to support distance learning? In addition, we had some questions asking Dr. Kang to compare the industrial complexes that North Korea is pursuing with prior policies like the special economic zones that North Korea pursued in the past. What's different? And if I might add there, is there any role for foreign cooperation, such as with Russia, in the industrial complexes that you're talking about for regional development? Another question, basically set of questions, asked how well these regional development oriented education programs are working. So now that graduates have gone through the education institutions that you outlined, are they sufficiently equipped to improve conditions and working outputs on the ground? And then we had some questions for Dr. Im about not just supply and demand, but also government control over prices. I think your presentation highlighted the consequences for North Korean people of the regime's policies quite well, especially in response to COVID. And one of the questioners asked, for example, why North Korea has pursued austerity measures rather than quantitative easing policies. And then finally, the questioner asked whether, Dr. Im, your data includes the Cheongmadang or black and gray markets in your PPT. And I think Bill just mentioned the US dollar, whether that data is also included. Okay, so this is a lot to cover. Let me first turn it to Dr. Kang for your final remarks. Maybe make it about 5 minutes or so, and then I'll turn it to Dr. Im.
So I can see that there are a
예.
lot of detailed
자세한
questions.
질문들도 많고, 예.
Thank you for your comments as well. So I
좋게 평가해
have
주셔서
a limited
고맙습니다.
amount of
짧게
time,
시간이
so let
주어졌기
me
때문에
briefly touch upon
3분
several
밖에 없으니
of these
몇 가지만
questions.
얘기해
First of all,
드리겠습니다. 우선은 북한에서 지역의
so
발전이 더디다는
regional
것은
development
김정은도
was
얘기를
announced
했고
by
모든
Kim Jong-un
사람들이
as
알고
well as
있는
other
거죠.
people.
그럼 그 지역 발전을 하기 위해서
So right now,
언제든
the regional development
시작해도
would
되는
have been
거라면
carrying
옛날에
out
됐고
right
지금도 했을
now
겁니다.
in
근데 왜
this
지금이냐?
year, and you
그리고
may
왜
wonder why it
2008년이냐?
was starting from 2008.
그런 자원들, 자원이나
I think the
자금,
core part here is to
기술,
figure
인력
out
등이
where the
어디서 왔느냐가
resources and manpower
핵심이겠죠.
came from.
제가 2008년,
The reason why I mentioned that
2009년부터 변화가
2008 was the
있었다라고
turning
얘기했던 거는
point
그때
was because
하노이 노딜 이전, 북미 간의 협상이 진행되는 다가 깨졌던
2008
하노이
also
노딜
had
이전에
the
2008년 노딜도 있었던
six
거예요.
lateral
그때 육자회담
summits,
결과로
which was
북미 간의
a
관계
no deal
정상화를 하려다가
in the end.
못했던 계기가 하나 있고요.
And in
또
2009,
하나는 2009년에 군에서
the
개발했던
military tried to
군용
develop nuclear weapons and
미사일과 핵을
missiles,
개발하기 위한 기술들 중에 핵심인
and these
CNC가
development
민으로
sites were
흘러나오기
revealed
시작했다라는 거죠.
by the
그
various information
이후에
sources,
변화가
and that
극심하게
was the
일어났기
turning
때문에
point.
저는 그때를 봤고 다르게 보면
So
조직입니다.
in fact, this kind of regional
그냥
development that
시작하자라고
cannot
한다고 되는
start
게
all at
아니라
once, but
조직적으로
it should
지방에도
be
사람이 있고
organized
여러 가지
with
동원돼서
various
협력할 수 있는
members
시스템이
and
있어야 되는데
resources. So
시스템을
In
혁신 체제
2008, I think
관점에서
that was
보니
the starting point of
2008년에
innovation.
변화가 생겼던 겁니다. 그 둘이 연결되는지
So
아닌지는
nationally,
모르지만
I
우선은
think
국가적으로
change was
2008년에
presumably
변화가
started in
뭔가
2008.
많았다라는 게 하나고요. 그다음 왜
And those
지금이냐는 거는
changes
그때 변화들이
accumulated until
지금에
today
와서 지방
and
경제가
has come
움직일 수
to where
있는
we are standing right
조직을
now.
갖추겠다라는 거죠. 그래서
So
원래는
I
더
think that was
뒤에
the
이슈로
perspective from
했겠지만
Kim Jong-un.
김정은의 입장에서는
And one of
그렇고요.
the important
그리고 또
other
하나
factor
다른
would
거는
be nuclear
핵입니다.
weapons.
핵 무력의 건설에
So there has
대해서
been no
자금이
information
얼마나
regarding the
들어갔냐는
funds
거는
for
지금까지
the nuclear
밝혀지진
development,
않지만
but there was a
맨하탄
report from
프로젝트에서
Manhattan.
나온 예산안이 있습니다.
And 90% of
90%
the budget
가량이
was
제일
first
처음
injected
핵
in
시설을
constructing the
만들 때
nuclear
들어가고
facility, and the other
나머지
10%
운용에 들어가는
was
거는
for
10%
the operation
정도밖에 안
of
되는 거죠.
nuclear
다르게
weapons.
말하면 처음
So you can
만들
see
때
that
자금이 많이
the
들어가고
funds
그
are
다음에는 별로 안
widely used at
들어가는데
the beginning.
북한이 핵무력을 언제
So
완성했다고 할 수
basically,
있을까?
around
라고
2008
하면
and
기본적으로
2009, North Korea
2008, 9년쯤에 어느 정도
completed
완성했죠.
its nuclear
딜리버리가
arsenals and
핵탄두를
warheads.
완성했습니다. 그리고
And
명확하게 다
in
보여준
2017,
거는
it also
2017년에
completed the
완성을
missiles. So
했죠.
right now,
그럼 지금은
it is
핵무력을
time for North
완성하는
Korea
시기가
to
아니라 유지
maintain
보수
their
약간의
nuclear
버전
facilities and
변화고
use
그
the
남은
rest of the resources
자원들을
for the
이제는
military
민수,
development and
특히
regional development. So I think the rest of the resources
지방으로
from the nuclear
투입하고
facility
있는 게
building
아닌가라는
are
거죠.
now being
여기서
put
기술을 왜
into the
얘기하냐면
regional development.
예전에도 하고 지금도 해도
So
되는 게
paper
아니라 지금
factories,
종이
all the
공장부터
necessities
생산 설비
companies,
전체가 바뀝니다.
factories,
똑같은 식료품 공장이지만
automobiles,
자동화
these kind of
그리고
all the factories will be
IT가
incorporated with the
들어가서
technologies and
컨트롤되는
IT.
흐름까지 넘어갔기 때문에
So that will be the
기술이
change
바뀌어서
that North
생산
Korea
능력이
is
바뀝니다.
trying to pursue.
그래서 그 능력을 갖추는 게
So this national
국가적으로
capacity
갖추는 게
plan
15년
will
이상, 길게는 한 20년
has been
걸려서 지금에
been
와서
planned out for the
지방으로
past 15
확산되고
years.
있다라고 생각하는 거죠.
So not only
기술이
constructing the
최첨단만 있는
technology
게
and
아니라
factories, but also
유지보수와 아주
maintaining this
작은
facility is
영역에서도
important. So that's why
기술이
North Korea
중요한
is
변화를
focusing on that.
가져오기
Thank
때문에
you.
제가 얘기를 드립니다. 이상입니다.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kang. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Im Song. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment. And because of the time constraints, I won't be able to cover all the 6 questions, but first question. Data is collected by Bank of Korea, and we came up with this index. And currently, Pyongyang and the entire North Korea's average was conducted. And our BOK statistics system is currently working on this index system. And from 2006 and 2023 data is uploaded there. And also, not all the 71 items, but the most important items, most important 14 items, we come up with the Pyongyang and other regions data. And we verify that data. We verify validity of the data, and we BOK statistics system provide that data, and Korea statistics also provide that data. So you can download that data from the websites. And I am personally interested in your last question. Is North Korea's prices status quo? 6,000 per dollar, and it skyrocketed, it peaked, and the exchange rate almost doubled, 16,001 per dollar. So is it a financial crisis in North Korea? So from my perspective, and I do not think that this is a financial crisis in North Korea, because what is most important is that the dollar price doubled in North Korea. And it has to do with the fundamental, instead of fundamental problem in North Korea, but considering North Korea's economic circumstances, because of reopening after the COVID pandemic, the income demand was sustained, but now it's skyrocketing because of reopening. So the demand for foreign currency is increasing. That is one of the main reasons. And the second is, I personally think that, just like Dr. Kang Hojye mentioned, the 20x10 policy in North Korea, while processing the policy, those regions in North Korea are non-border places and non-industrial places. So there is not much dollar and there is not much source for import. So there are factories and materials that North Korea must import, but if North Korea tries to import it, then instead of the government supplying it, those regions had to import by themselves. Just like Dr. Kang mentioned, it could be technology or efforts. Labor forces are almost free in North Korea because of the military services. And cements or landfills, it can be provided by the North Korean government. But if you take a look at the budget, there is not yet budget for 20x10 policy. So even if there are needed goods, those local places, municipalities, they have to do on their selves importing those goods. And also North Korea currently has a policy that the central government has to work on. Then those enterprises or businesses, they have this assignment from the government that they should prepare in dollar denomination. So if they do not have enough dollars, then they have to go to the foreign exchange market in North Korea to buy dollars. So if those municipal places do not have enough dollars, then the local places exchange rate will exchange. Because of that, there will be market speculators. So because of those speculative actors, the exchange rate could skyrocket. So because of those, dollar exchange could change. The main problem here is the rice prices. So rice prices, it's not completely reflected compared to US dollar. For example, it could be like 6,000 or 7,000, but it's not a significant difference. So probably the reason is that the reason why the rice prices increased is that from last year, North Korean wages increased by almost 40% or so. If they increase laborers' salary, then that means they need more monetary circulation. So probably because of that, North Korean rice prices increased. But wages increased by almost 40%, but rice prices did not increase that much. So probably that means that North Korea's food supply is stabilized compared to the past. And North Korea currently has a new grain policy. So the details I cannot share completely today, but North Korean prices is currently keep adjusting back and forth. And North Korean prices is currently looking for a new balance. So in the middle of finding a new balance, I would say. So if you take a look at the numbers, the wages increased by 40, but dollar increased by twofold, but rice prices did not increase that much. So if you say it's North Korea's financial crisis, then probably it's a very early statement to say so. That is my opinion. And also, I'll choose one more question. Is the monetary policy in North Korean central bank and tightening policy. North Korea's central bank, just like you mentioned, North Korean central bank does not do much. So there's a main policy and they just print out money. That was their past role. But in the past, there was only one role, cash planning. So what is the definition of cash planning is that the government prints cash and then collects money. So they have to seek the balance. They set a desired amount of money circulation and they just follow the amount. In the past, that was the one and only goal, but recently the financial policy changed a lot. In the past, there was a mono banking system, but recently, as you may know, there are two-tier banking system. There is a commercial bank in North Korea. And entities in the past got funding from the government, but nowadays they get borrowings, they get loans. So nowadays, unlike the past where there was only one policy, but nowadays there's benchmark rate and then there's monetary reserve. So now there are 3 different policies in total. And recently the tightening policy, and you asked if that decreased investment, but I personally think investment did not decrease that much. So tightening monetary policy here is that they just hinder a skyrocketing amount of circulation. So the fiscal money, they just inject money and provide money to enterprises. And they just, in the past, they don't get the money back. But nowadays, because it's a loan, they get money back from enterprises. So those companies, they borrow money from the bank and produce goods, and then they have to give back a certain percentage back to the government. And then they have to pay the principal and the interest. So now entities have more burden. So it's probably this policy was in order to enhance the efficiency of businesses. So it does not necessarily lower interest investment itself. That is all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Im, for your final remarks. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this morning's session, and in particular to thank our speakers, Dr. Im and Dr. Kang, as well as our discussants, Dr. Im and Mr. Brown, for these insightful remarks. I think you gave us a great sense of the complex political and economic incentives that structure the actions of the regime as well as of North Korean citizens. And if you want to hear more, please join us for tomorrow morning's North Korea Economic Forum Annual Conference Part 2. Because of the time difference, we had to split it into 2 mornings or 2 evenings for those of you joining us from Korea. And we're going to have a keynote address, as Rachel mentioned, as well as 2 more papers tomorrow to continue this discussion, in particular looking at foreign affairs of North Korea. So please join us if you have time tomorrow for the next portion of the North Korea Economic Forum Annual Conference. But for this morning, let me conclude, and please join me in thanking our speakers and discussants. Thank you.